I was standing outside my parents' bedroom door at midnight, listening to them plan my financial future without asking me. My brother Derek had just crashed his third car in 2 years, this time into a family's minivan while driving drunk, and the insurance company was refusing to cover the damages. My mother's voice was clear through the thin walls. "Don't worry about the money, Derek. We'll just take it from Nadia's college fund and make her pay us back after she graduates. She owes us anyway for raising her." My father agreed, saying I'd been selfish long enough and it was time I helped the family for once. They had no idea I was listening, and they definitely had no idea that their responsible, straight-A daughter had been secretly planning for this exact moment for 3 years. By morning, every account with my name on it would be empty, and they'd learn the hard way that taking someone for granted eventually comes with a price. My name is Nadia, and before I discovered what my parents really thought of me, I'd spent 20 years being the perfect daughter who never caused problems. I was a junior at Oregon State University studying accounting and finance, maintaining a 3.9 GPA while working 25 hours a week at a tax preparation office in Corvallis. My professors knew me as the student who always had her assignments done early and helped struggling classmates with complex financial calculations during study groups. The small apartment I shared with 2 roommates near campus was where I spent my evenings doing homework and freelance bookkeeping for local small businesses. I'd built a client base of 5 restaurants and 2 retail stores that paid me to organize their financial records and prepare their quarterly tax reports. This work, combined with my part-time office job, brought in about $1,500 a month that I split between tuition payments, living expenses, and savings. Back home in Eugene, my parents had always praised me for being independent and responsible, especially compared to my younger brother Derek, who seemed incapable of keeping a job or staying out of trouble for more than a few months at a time. They'd set up college savings accounts for both of us when we were kids, but Derek had dropped out of community college after 1 semester to pursue his dream of becoming a professional video game streamer. His account had been emptied to pay for gaming equipment and streaming setup that never generated any income. My college fund, on the other hand, had grown to almost $38,000 by the time I started university. I'd been contributing to it myself since I got my first job at 16, and my parents had been adding small amounts from their paychecks and tax refunds. The account was technically in my name with them as co-signers, something they'd done to help with financial aid applications and tax benefits. If stories about family financial manipulation and favoritism hit home, make sure you're subscribed. These situations are unfortunately common in many households. The preferential treatment for Derek had been obvious since we were kids, but it got worse after I turned 18 and started making my own money. My parents had this unspoken expectation that my success was somehow communal property, while Derek's failures were personal challenges that required family support. When I got a scholarship that reduced my tuition by 60%, they celebrated for about 5 minutes before suggesting I could use the extra money to help pay for Derek's car repairs. The first major incident happened during my sophomore year. Derek had been fired from his third job in 6 months, this time for showing up late repeatedly and arguing with customers at a video game store. Instead of finding another job, he decided to start a YouTube channel about cryptocurrency investing, despite knowing nothing about either topic. He asked my parents for $5,000 to buy recording equipment and cryptocurrency to feature in his videos. When they said they didn't have that kind of money available, Derek suggested they borrow it from my college fund temporarily, just until his channel started making money. My parents called me that evening to explain that this was a great investment opportunity for the whole family and that I should be excited to support my brother's entrepreneurial spirit. They'd already transferred the money before asking my opinion. The YouTube channel lasted 3 months and generated exactly $47 in ad revenue. Derek never mentioned paying back the loan, and when I brought it up during Thanksgiving dinner, he got defensive and said I was being selfish by prioritizing money over family bonds. My parents agreed, suggesting that I was too focused on material things and needed to remember that family comes before personal financial goals. The second betrayal involved my emergency fund. I'd been saving money from my part-time jobs in a separate account for unexpected expenses like car repairs or medical bills. Over 2 years, I'd managed to save almost $4,000 by working extra shifts and being careful with my spending. My parents knew about this account because I'd mentioned it during conversations about financial responsibility and planning for the future. Last summer, Derek got arrested for driving under the influence and needed bail money plus legal fees. Instead of asking me directly, my parents accessed my emergency fund using old account information from when I was a minor, and they were listed as joint account holders. They took $3,500, leaving me with just enough to keep the account open, then called me after the fact to explain that family emergencies required everyone to contribute according to their ability. When I pointed out that Derek's poor choices weren't my emergency and that I'd been saving that money for my own unexpected expenses, my mother said I was being cruel and selfish during a family crisis. She added that Derek would pay me back once he got his life together, but 6 months later, he was still unemployed and living in their basement. The final straw came on a Tuesday night in November. I'd driven home to Eugene for the week because it was Thanksgiving break and I wanted to spend time with the family before final exams. I'd been planning to ask my parents about using some of my college fund for a study abroad program in London that would give me international business experience and look great on job applications after graduation. Derek had been drinking at a bar with friends and decided to drive home even though his license was still suspended from the DUI arrest. He ran a red light and slammed into a minivan carrying a family of 4, sending 2 kids to the hospital with broken bones and concussions. The father needed surgery for internal injuries, and the mother had a fractured spine that would require months of physical therapy. The insurance company investigated and discovered that Derek had been driving without a valid license, which voided his coverage completely. The family's medical bills were approaching $200,000, and their lawyer was threatening to sue my parents for everything they owned since Derek was living in their house and driving a car registered in their name. My parents were panicking about losing their house, their retirement savings, and possibly facing bankruptcy. They spent the evening on the phone with lawyers, insurance agents, and financial advisors, trying to figure out how to handle the massive liability Derek had created with his selfish decision to drink and drive. That's when I overheard the conversation that changed everything between us forever. I'd gone to bed around 11 but couldn't sleep because of all the phone calls and stressed voices coming from downstairs. Around midnight, I got up to get some water and heard my parents talking quietly in their bedroom about potential solutions to their financial crisis. My mother was explaining to my father that they could access my college fund since my name was on the account, use that money for immediate legal expenses, then make me responsible for paying back the family's debt over time after I graduated and got a job. My father agreed, adding that I'd been freeloading off their support for years, and it was time I contributed something meaningful to the family instead of just focusing on my own education and career goals. They calculated that my future earning potential in accounting would easily allow me to handle the debt payments, especially since I wouldn't have student loans if they used my college fund for current expenses instead of future tuition. They were planning to take everything I'd worked for and turn me into their personal ATM to pay for Derek's mistakes, all while framing it as my obligation to the family that had raised me. I stood in that hallway for 20 more minutes, listening to them plan my financial servitude in detail. They discussed how much they could reasonably expect me to pay each month after graduation, whether they should tell me about the debt transfer before or after they'd already done it, and how to frame the conversation so I'd feel guilty about objecting to their plan. The most painful part wasn't the money, though losing $38,000 would destroy my plans for finishing college without student loans. The worst part was realizing that they'd never seen me as their daughter with her own dreams and goals. I was just a resource to be managed, a backup plan for when Derek's irresponsibility created problems they couldn't solve alone. I went back to my childhood bedroom and sat on the bed where I'd spent countless hours studying and planning for my future. The room was exactly as I'd left it when I moved out for college, with my honor roll certificates still hanging on the walls and my bookshelf full of finance and accounting textbooks I'd collected over the years. But looking around that room now, I saw it differently. Those achievements weren't proud family memories. They were evidence that I'd been working toward someone else's plan for my life, not my own. My parents had raised me to be responsible and hardworking so I could eventually take care of Derek's messes and their retirement needs. I remembered a conversation from my corporate finance class about hostile takeovers, when one company acquires another against the target's wishes by purchasing enough shares to control the board of directors. The professor had explained that the most successful takeovers happen when the target company doesn't realize they're under attack until it's too late to mount an effective defense. My parents thought they were executing a friendly acquisition of my financial resources. They had no idea they were about to discover what a hostile takeover actually looked like. I waited until 6 a.m., when the banks opened for online transfers, then spent the next 3 hours systematically emptying every account that had my name on it. The college fund, my emergency savings, my checking account, and a small investment account I'd started with money from my bookkeeping clients. In total, I moved $43,000 to a new bank account I'd opened at a credit union in Corvallis that my parents had never heard of. The tricky part was the college fund, which required both signatures for withdrawals over $10,000. But I'd been managing my parents' taxes for the past 2 years as practice for my accounting coursework, which meant I had access to their banking passwords and could authorize the transfer using their online login credentials. Technically fraud, but I was taking my own money that they were planning to steal, so I felt justified in bending the rules. My first mistake was underestimating how quickly they'd notice. I'd expected to have until Monday morning when the banks opened for business, but they'd apparently planned to start moving money immediately and discovered the empty accounts by noon on Wednesday. My mother called me 7 times before I finally answered, and when I did, she was screaming about unauthorized withdrawals and threatening to call the police. I explained calmly that I'd moved my money to protect it from their plan to use it for Derek's legal expenses. When she demanded to know how I'd found out about their conversation, I told her I'd overheard them discussing my financial future without consulting me, and I'd decided to take control of my own money before they could steal it. The second complication came from my father, who drove to Corvallis that afternoon and showed up at my apartment demanding that I return the money immediately. He claimed that the college fund had always been family money, not personal savings, and that I was being selfish and ungrateful by prioritizing my education over Derek's crisis. When I refused to give him my new bank information, he said he was going to contact the university financial aid office and tell them I'd hidden assets in order to fraudulently qualify for need-based aid. This was a serious threat because it could result in me losing my scholarships and facing federal charges for financial aid fraud. But I'd prepared for this possibility too. The confrontation I'd been planning happened the next evening, when both my parents drove to Corvallis and demanded a family meeting to resolve the money situation. They'd brought Derek with them, and the 3 of them sat in my tiny living room explaining why I needed to be reasonable and help solve the family's financial crisis. Derek started by apologizing for the accident and acknowledging that his drinking had created problems for everyone. But then he said that families stick together during difficult times, and my refusal to help was showing my true character as someone who cared more about money than her own brother's life and freedom. My mother was more direct. She said I owed them everything I'd accomplished because they'd raised me, supported my education, and helped me become the kind of person who could earn good money in the future. The college fund had always been intended as an investment in my potential to contribute to the family's long-term financial security, not just my personal benefit. My father presented their proposal. I would return the money immediately and agree to make monthly payments of $1,500 for the next 10 years to help cover Derek's legal debts and the family's financial recovery. In exchange, they wouldn't pursue legal action against me for the unauthorized transfers, and they'd continue to claim me as a dependent on their taxes so I could keep my financial aid. That's when I pulled out my laptop and showed them exactly why their threats were meaningless and their plan was about to backfire spectacularly. I'd spent the morning preparing a detailed financial analysis of their household, including 3 years of tax returns I'd prepared for them, bank statements they'd shared with me for budgeting purposes, and documentation of every expense they'd covered for Derek since he'd dropped out of college. The numbers were devastating. They'd spent over $60,000 supporting Derek's unemployment, legal problems, and failed business ventures. They'd borrowed against their house twice to pay for his mistakes. Their retirement accounts were nearly empty, their credit cards were maxed out, and they had no realistic plan for paying Derek's current legal debts even with my college fund. But the most damaging information was Derek's employment history and criminal record. 3 DUI arrests, 2 for driving with a suspended license, 1 for public intoxication, and a pattern of job terminations for unreliability and substance abuse problems. The family he'd injured had hired a personal injury lawyer who specialized in cases involving repeat offenders, and they were seeking punitive damages designed to prevent future incidents. I explained to my parents that taking my money wouldn't solve their problems because Derek's liability exceeded anything they could reasonably pay. The smart financial decision was to declare bankruptcy, let Derek face criminal charges alone, and preserve whatever assets they could for their own retirement. Instead, I offered them a different deal. I would pay for a good lawyer to help Derek navigate his criminal case, but only if they agreed to remove his name from their insurance policies, evict him from their house, and stop enabling his destructive behavior. If they refused, I would not only keep my money, but also provide the injured family's lawyer with detailed documentation of Derek's history and my parents' financial situation to help them maximize their recovery. They had 24 hours to decide. My parents chose Derek, just as I'd expected they would. They rejected my offer, continued enabling his irresponsible behavior, and spent the next 6 months fighting legal battles they couldn't afford. The personal injury lawsuit resulted in a judgment of $450,000 against Derek and my parents jointly. The criminal case sent Derek to prison for 18 months on vehicular assault charges. While they were dealing with bankruptcy proceedings and asset seizure, I was using my secure finances to finish my degree without student loans and build my accounting career. I graduated summa cum laude, passed the CPA exam on my first attempt, and accepted a position with a Big Four accounting firm in Portland with a starting salary of $68,000 plus benefits. The most satisfying part wasn't my professional success, though. It was watching my parents finally understand the real cost of their favoritism. With Derek in prison and their assets gone, they had to confront the reality that they'd spent 20 years enabling a son who would never take care of them and alienating a daughter who could have helped them build financial security. 6 months after Derek's sentencing, my mother called to apologize and ask if we could rebuild our relationship. She acknowledged that they'd treated me unfairly and taken advantage of my responsibility and success. She said they'd learned from their mistakes and hoped I could forgive them enough to be part of the family again. I listened politely, then explained that our relationship had always been transactional from their perspective, and I was simply choosing not to participate in transactions that didn't benefit me anymore. They'd taught me that family members are expected to sacrifice for each other, but only in one direction. I'd learned the lesson better than they'd intended. 2 years later, they lost their house to pay Derek's legal debts. My father took early retirement, and they moved into a small apartment across town. Derek was released from prison and moved back in with them, still unemployed and still expecting them to support his efforts to get his life together. Meanwhile, I'd been promoted twice, bought a condo in Northwest Portland, and started my own tax preparation business that served clients throughout Oregon. The money I'd protected from their plan had grown into a solid foundation for the kind of life I'd always wanted to build for myself. People ask me if I feel bad about abandoning my family during their time of need, and I always ask them to define what they mean by family. If family means people who love and support each other unconditionally, then my parents stopped being family the moment they decided to sacrifice my future for Derek's convenience. What I learned from this experience is that some people will exploit your sense of obligation as long as you let them. They'll frame their selfish decisions as family loyalty and make you feel guilty for protecting your own interests. But real family members don't ask you to pay for mistakes you didn't make or sacrifice opportunities you've earned through your own hard work. The most important lesson was about the difference between supporting people you love and enabling people who refuse to take responsibility for their choices. My parents thought they were being good parents by protecting Derek from consequences, but they were actually preventing him from learning how to be a functional adult. By removing myself from their financial planning, I forced them to confront the reality of Derek's problems without using me as a safety net. It wasn't easy for any of us, but it was the only way to break the cycle of dependency and manipulation that had been poisoning our family relationships for years. If you're listening to this and recognizing similar patterns in your own family, understand that you don't owe anyone your financial security just because they raised you or because they need help fixing problems they created. Supporting people you care about is admirable, but not when it comes at the cost of your own future and happiness. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and let people face the full consequences of their choices, even when they're people you care about deeply. It's not cruel or selfish to protect what you've worked for, especially when the alternative is enabling behavior that hurts everyone in the long run.